Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, distinguished guests. You're welcome to today's event, the 2021 Annual Issuers Engagement Forum, hosted by NGX Regulation Limited. The theme for today's event is Corporate Disclosures Beyond the Numbers. Sustainability and sustainable business reporting has in recent times gained the attention of stakeholders, critical stakeholders, with respect to the performance of organizations. Now, stakeholder interests, have experienced a gradual but steady and increasingly vibrant metamorphosis from the basic minimum expectations of just the numbers, which is what some people will call the traditional financial reporting, to the point of disclosures around the impact of the business on the economic, social, and environmental pillars of society. Today's event will cover a range of discussions around the subject matter, with a keynote address, a panel discussion, and a few other items. Once again, to you who has joined us at this event, we say welcome, good morning, and thank you. Straight away to start off this event, I would like to invite for her opening remarks, the CEO of NGX Regulation Limited, Ms. Tinoade Awe. CEO, over to you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to be here today. I want to say welcome. Indeed, I don't think it's just good morning because we have people joining us from all over the globe. It's good morning, it's good afternoon, and in some cases, it's almost good night. We welcome you. As I said, I have great pleasure in welcoming you to this engagement forum with the theme Corporate Disclosures Beyond Numbers. The theme of this year's engagement forum is an interesting one, considering the global trends in climate change, as well as social and environmental impacts of business operations. You recall that during the mid-year's Issuers Engagement Forum, I took time out to brief you on the new operating structure of the demutualized Nigerian Stock Exchange. Thus, I'm confident that the listeners are now familiar with our new operating structures. And I'm very excited to host this year's engagement forum, being the first in our incarnation as NGX Regulation Limited, which we regularly call NGX RegCo. NGX RegCo is committed to regulating in a manner that promotes a fair, transparent, and orderly market. In the year under review, we noted certain compliance issues, which will be discussed with you at this forum, while we take a cursory look into our regulatory projections for 2022. As you're aware, the capital market is information-driven. Thus, we continue to encourage issuers to show transparency in their business activities through timely disclosure of price-sensitive information to the market to prevent information asymmetry. The head of listings regulation will take you through the level of compliance with disclosure requirements, as well as other post-listing obligations recorded during the year in the latter part of the program. I wish to solicit for your commitment to building a transparent and sustainable market as company secretaries, chief financial officers, and compliance officers of your respective companies through quality and timely information disclosure to the market. The annual engagement forum with issuers presents an opportunity to have robust interactions with you, as well as representatives of our esteemed listed companies. We expect that you will be free to express and share your experiences on any regulatory challenges that you have encountered in the course of the year, either as a specific company or as a sector of the economy. NGX RegCo is committed to working with you to guide you through complying with Nigerian Exchange Limited's post-listing obligations, as well as other regulatory requirements for public listed companies, particularly with regards to upholding good governance practices that thrive on accountability and enhanced information disclosure. Without attempting to delve into discussing the theme of this forum in these brief opening remarks, because that theme will be extensively discussed by the carefully selected speakers who are renowned professionals in their respective fields, I would like to say a few words on the theme to prepare our minds towards the panel discussion, which I believe will be very enlightening. The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic is still very visible across the global economy. Indeed, we're all aware that we now have a new variant of the virus, the Omicron variant. While many businesses are either closed or waiting for the economy to open up or operating in some hybrid fashion, others have weathered through the storm created by the pandemic, leveraging on their business continuity plans built on sustainable business models. Thus, the theme of this year's forum is aptly couched to reflect the realities of our world today, with the increasing levels of shareholder activism and greater levels of scrutiny on financial performance. The qualitative aspects of information disclosure are becoming very essential for businesses to take very, very serious. It is imperative that companies provide both financial and other information. Thus, there's an increasing need to go beyond financial performance to reporting on other things, such as the impacts of our carbon footprints on the environment and society, as well as the establishment of sustainable strategies and governance structures. To this end, NGX released the Sustainability Disclosure Guidelines in December 2018. The guidelines provide the value proposition for sustainability, as well as a step-by-step approach on integrating sustainability in organizations and detailed indicators that should be considered when providing annual disclosures to NGX. In addition, Principle 26 of the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance 2018 states that paying adequate attention to sustainability issues, including environmental, social, occupational, and community health and safety, ensures long-term business performance and projects the company as a responsible corporate citizen contributing to economic development. The Securities and Exchange Commission, our regulator, also recently introduced its guidelines for sustainable financial principles for the Nigerian capital market in April 2021. These and other efforts by the government, market regulators, and policymakers in the sustainability space point to the increasing importance of sustainability reporting in the context of enhanced corporate disclosures. Around sustainability disclosures, there's several global efforts coalescing in this area, and issuers will ignore them at their own peril. Indeed, these are interesting developments. Following the disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic and the various adjustments necessitated by the pandemic, we must begin to ask ourselves some pertinent questions bordering on the future outlook of our businesses. I'm certain that some of the questions throbbing in our hearts will find answers during the panel discussion. And so I enjoy you to join me to stay connected and to participate actively in order for us to have an engaging session. I thank you for listening. And again, I welcome you to this event. Over to you, Ken.
Okay, thank you very much, CEO, for those succinct remarks. And with that, the event is open. At this time, we would like to invite for his goodwill message, the Director General of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Dr. Lamido Yuguda, CFA, ably represented by the Executive Commissioner of Operations, Mr. Dayo Obison. Over to you, please.
Good morning and thank you very much. Can everyone hear me clearly?
Yes, sir, clearly.
Yes, we can.
Okay, fantastic. Good morning and thank you everyone, and thank you for inviting us. Mr. Lamido Yuguda, the Director General of the Securities and Exchange Commission, extends his warm greetings. Unfortunately, he cannot be here present, though he's in full support, quite aware, and ordinarily would have been here present except for some clashing parallel work engagements that necessitates him to be physically present somewhere else. So I'll just read his goodwill message as read and just put the caveat that any errors or anything noted in the goodwill message, although I expect there to be none, are mine. And I'll take full responsibility for that. So I'll read his remarks. Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Please permit me to stand on the already established protocol. It gives me great pleasure to be part of this event today and to deliver these remarks. Let me start by congratulating the NGX RegPro for organizing this annual Issuers Engagement Forum and for providing an opportunity and a platform for issuers to engage with regulators on pertinent regulatory issues. Because of the importance of this kind of engagement, the SEC and NECA organized the Securities Issuance Forum on August 4th, 2021. I encourage the board of NGX Regco to sustain the momentum while making improvements on subsequent editions. The theme of today's event, corporate disclosures beyond the numbers, is very relevant. This is especially so as the integrity of any market can be partly measured by the content, quality, and timeliness of information disclosure. The mere provision of information to the public is not sufficient. What is absolutely important is the integrity, completeness, and timeliness of the information so provided. As you are aware, in today's corporate world, the conventional corporate reporting system that favors disclosure of financial over non-financial information is no longer sufficient. Global financial markets have moved towards the acceptance of sustainability reporting to complement existing reporting by corporates. Sustainability reporting emphasizes reporting on environmental, social, and governance impacts on business activities of companies and organizations. To infuse the tenets of sustainability reporting in our markets and align market philosophies with global trends, the Securities and Exchange Commission adopted the Nigerian Sustainable Finance Principles developed by the Financial Services Regulation Coordinating Committee, that's the FSRCC. And I believe that's what Tinu alluded to earlier. And in May 2021, issued guidelines on the NSFP, that is the Nigerian Sustainable Finance Principles for regulated entities. The guidelines are principles based and cover environmental and social governance considerations, collaborative partnership and capacity building, financing of property sectors of the economy, priority sectors, of the economy, human rights, women, economic empowerment, job creation, and financial inclusion and reporting disclosure. The SEC has observed that in response to its efforts, investors who hitherto focus only on financial performance indicators now pay attention to non-financial indicators to identify material risks, grow opportunities, and other variables in the companies in which they invest. Consequently, we encourage listed entities to embrace a culture of reporting that includes sustainability considerations, transparency, integrity, accuracy, and timeliness in information reported to the public, as it will present them greater investment opportunities and ultimately lead to increase in their respective values. Let me reiterate that the Securities and Exchange Commission is continually focused on increasing the visibility and attractiveness of our markets and will continue to focus on building and sustaining a fair, transparent, and efficient capital market. Capital is attracted by returns as much as the quality of disclosure in the respective markets. As succinctly articulated by Arthur Levitt, that's the former chair of the US Securities and Exchange Commission. Quote open. If investors are not confident with the level of disclosure, capital will flow elsewhere. If a country opts for lax accounting and reporting standards, capital will flow elsewhere. All enterprises in that country, regardless of how steadfast a particular company practices may be, suffers the consequences. End of quote. In conclusion, the SEC will implement the strategies proposed in the Nigerian Capital Market Master Plan 2015 to 2025 to improve the existing disclosure regime. It will also continue to monitor emerging risks, especially those triggered by increased use of technology, and execute market development initiatives that will ensure market resilience in the coming years. In conclusion, I wish you all a productive and interactive dialogue and urge you, as we deliberate today, to brainstorm on how to further raise the bar on corporate financial disclosure and sustainability reporting. Thank you and God bless. Signed, Lamido A. Yuguda, Director General, Securities and Exchange Commission. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, Digi. Thank you very much, Mr. Dayo Bisnon. Thank you for that goodwill message at today's event. We would now like to move on into the keynote address for today, and I'll be introducing the keynote speaker. Professor Kenneth Amishi is a leading scholar on sustainable business and finance in the Global South. He is the chair in business and sustainable development and director scaling business in Africa at the University of Edinburgh. He also holds a chair in sustainable finance and governance at the School of Transnational Governance, European University Institute, Florence in Italy. Kenneth's research interest currently focuses on financial market reforms and governance, as well as on sector-level policies for sustainability and sustainability strategy in organizations. He has an expert-level knowledge of developing and emerging economies, and since 2015, he has significantly contributed to developing the intellectual foundations of Africapitalism, which is an economic philosophy for the development of Africa, and he has championed this mainstreaming in the global academia. Besides teaching and researching, he works closely with businesses and governments in Africa, Europe, and Asia on matters of interest. He was recently a scholar in residence at the National Pension Commission, Nigeria. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to present to you Professor Kenneth Amishi for his keynote address.
Thank you very much for that kind of introduction. And good morning, everyone, or good afternoon or evening, wherever you are. I stand on existing protocols. So I will share my slides and run through it quickly so we can have enough time for discussion. So I hope you can see my slides now.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. So I've been given this nice topic to talk about, corporate disclosures beyond numbers. So I will start by making clear my position on sustainability, my take on it, and then reflect on some of the pressures I see as well as challenges. And quickly then go through what I consider to be one of the issues when it comes to sustainability reporting, which is the fact that we are still trapped in numbers, and then ask whether we'll be able to transcend that challenge. So what is sustainability in a nutshell? People talk about sustainability in different ways. So if you ask an average person, what is your understanding of sustainability? They're likely to give you words like the ones I've highlighted above, and they're all correct, depending on how one looks at it. But in our context, or if we're talking about ESG, I would like to see more from a sustainable development perspective, where we are thinking of sustainability as the positive or progressive social, environmental, and economic development. And the three are interlinked in many ways. Another thing I would also like to emphasize is my take on sustainability as impact management. So when companies make money, companies are there to make profit, but in the course of making profit, they also create positive impacts. So it could be jobs, consumer welfare, or tax revenues, infrastructure, and even skills development. They also create negative impacts, pollution, human rights abuse, and we can go on and name them. The point I'm trying to make here is that sustainability is a conscious attempt to reduce our negative impacts and enhance our positive impacts in the course of doing business. So for us to do that, there are different ways we can use to achieve that goal. But the SDGs are there as signposts in a way to help us think about our impacts across the different goals. Another point is to say that sustainability is a mindset. So if we think about sustainability as impact management, then we are also required to be conscious of our impacts. And to be conscious of our impacts requires us to have a sustainability mindset. And in that sense, sustainability becomes a culture and not a tick box exercise. And this mindset I'm trying to suggest that has four components. One is the first part, which thinks about system thinking. We need to understand that things are connected and things don't exist in isolation. So if I'm in business, then I need to understand the impacts I'm making. But if I understand my impact, it's not enough. There is something in me that triggers the that pushes me to think about what to do about my impact. And that's what I call the sense of justice and fairness, especially when you think or understand that your impacts are negative. But if you stop here, nothing happens. So the third one is what I call the sense of innovation, creativity, and change, because you need to now think of what to do and how. And doing that means that you have to move away from business as usual to think about creative ways of overcoming your negative impacts and enhancing your positive impacts. And the fourth element is the sense of transparency and accountability, which is, I guess, where we are today in terms of our focus on corporate disclosures. But there is a tension there, the tension between knowing what to do and how to do it. There is also a tension between whether you want to do it voluntarily or you need to be pushed by regulation. And that's one of the things, again, when it comes to sustainability reporting that we grapple with. Should it be left to companies to report on, or should we have rules and regulations guiding it? But there are pressures, obviously, and these pressures might come from investors. It might also come from regulators. Say in Nigeria, we have the Sustainable Banking Principles. You also have the NGX corporate disclosures. You also have consumers now trying to push companies one way or the other to be socially responsible. We also have standards like the GRI. So there, as I've already talked about, NGS, and then Nairobi Stock Exchange recently also launched their own ESG disclosure guidance, and Botswana already has one, which was launched in December 2018. But given this fact, then there's also another question to be asked: why should companies do sustainability reporting, even if it's not mandatory? Are there positive benefits? Are there values that can come from sustainability reporting? I think one point to make is that it helps to build trust. And if you are transparent, if you pay attention to your different stakeholders and your impacts on them, it helps to build foster a good relationship between you and your stakeholders, and that's the essence of trust. It can also help you in efficiency. And I normally tell companies, think of your sustainability report as a medical checkup, right? So you go to your doctor, you open yourself, and they examine you, and they come back with a report. That report doesn't necessarily need to be for the public. And in financial accounting or reporting, you find a very clinical way of separating management report or management account from your financial report that is for the public. So sustainability report can also have that dimension whereby it helps companies to figure out where they are doing well and what they are not doing well. And then that gives you space for innovation and creativity. And there have been a lot of studies and evidence showing that companies that pay attention to their sustainability reporting process are usually more efficient and also more innovative. So like I said, sustainability reporting can just be seen as an excellent organizational health check. But the question I have for myself today, and I thought probably the audience might be keen to also explore, is whether we are actually going beyond numbers through corporate disclosures, or are we moving from numbers to numbers? So I think here we are looking at financial reporting, or the emphasis on numbers meaning kind of the accounting figures. And so, well, we need to do more. We need to go beyond those numbers and then begin to talk about the other side, the narratives that might come with other financial reports or even sustainability reporting. But I'm a bit skeptical about that agenda, because what we have, the system we have, is one that is still prioritizing numbers. And numbers here, I would suggest, goes beyond just the actual numbers, but also thinking about the mathematization of narratives and the calculability that is required for corporate reports and disclosures, whether in financial reports or even sustainability reports, to make sense. And in order to make that argument, I'm drawing from a paper I wrote in 2010, which was published in the Journal of Business Ethics. And there I was reflecting on the possible challenges of mainstreaming responsible investment practices across board. And I was using, it was kind of a research that came from a work I did at the University of Cranfield when I was there. But without boring you, the key questions we wanted to understand was, to what extent what are the barriers to mainstreaming ESG in investment decisions? And we're using ESG here as a proxy for sustainability. And I borrowed from the work of Callon and Muneza 2005 in organizational studies that was talking about economic markets as calculative collective devices. Again, coming to the fact that for sustainability, I think the point I wanted to make is that for sustainability to be acceptable, for it to work in your typical markets, sustainability needs to fit into the calculative device of the market. So again, the point there is that we are not moving away from numbers, so to speak, but we are going into numbers, but in a different form. So sustainability, we found that needs to be an object. It has to be manipulable. So it has to be a good, and it's something to be evaluated as a thing. So if it is not able to fit into this narrative of being an object, investors struggle with it because we have many names for the same thing, whether we call it circular economy or we call it human rights or we call it labor rights, whatever. So investors are careful to say, okay, but what does this thing mean? Because sustainability in itself is fluffy. So it has to be stabilized, it has to be concretized, it has to become an object for the market to take it seriously. And here are some quotes from investors talking about it. So we are challenged by data inconsistencies, regional differences in policy focus, and even degrees of integration across the value chain, right? So some analysts also argue that sustainability is using different... Yeah, some analysts also argue that it is used in different forms. Again, talking about the inconsistencies in how sustainability is used. So in order to stabilize it, so we have some things now coming up like the EU taxonomy on sustainability or sustainable finance. And that in itself is playing a role. You also have the likes of GRI doing their bit to stabilize the idea for it to fit for purpose. Then if you stabilize the idea and if we're able to concretize it, the question then is, how do we place a value on it? How do we singularize it? And that's where the calculation comes in. And that calculation is for comparison. So it's, calculate the sustainability then needs to be calculable and comparable. So that if I have a volume or a quantity of carbon, for example, I can compare company A against company B. So how do we quantify the narrative? So if I'm looking at 2 or 3 companies, I need to find a way of ranking them. I need to find a way of placing a value on what how I see them. And that singularization is also seen as a form of placing monetary value. So you can say this thing, a ton of carbon is $5, whatever. So that's the singularization, placing price on what is valued. So again, sustainability is in that space where we're also looking at how do we place a value on it? And that value in terms of monetary value should also be comparable with other forms of financial variables within our assessment of companies. So the likes of SASB are now working very hard to find a way of putting value on this. And even the accounting body, the global accounting body, has come into the space. But if you look at what they're doing, their focus is more on investors and the financial community and how can they place value and monetize sustainability. So if you're able to quantify sustainability and you're able to place a value on it through singularization, then the other thing that sustainability needs to travel. It needs an exchange mechanism. It needs a network. It needs a platform like the Nigerian MGX, for example. So where you can trade and commercialize sustainability. And you can see many initiatives today coming into place to help sustainability to travel, to be exchangeable. So you also have the Sustainable Banking and Financial Network led by the IFC. I've already talked about some of these platforms today. So you have NGX, you have Nairobi Securities Exchange, and the Botswana one. So these are platforms that will make sustainability to be commercializable. So sustainability has to fit into the market narrative and into the market logic. And if it doesn't do that, then it struggles. So if you look at what we're trying to do today, then we need to ask ourselves, to what extent are we truly going beyond numbers, or are we trapped in numbers? So if you summarize what I'm talking about, the first one is objectification, the second one is singularization, and the third one is exchangeability. So I think this might help us as we think through the conversation today. But what has changed 11 years afterwards? For me, I think the more things change, the more they stay the same. But one important thing also to take on board is that not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. And that's, again, an important lesson for the sustainability agenda, and also the idea that markets can calculate everything. There may be certain things that can be calculated, and we need to live with those. But finally, just to come to a point, if I look at some of the existing instruments or frameworks for calculating and measuring sustainability, they are usually from outside Africa. So I'm currently doing a study looking at how frameworks are shaping ESG adoption in Africa. And we noticed that the ones highlighted in yellow are the dominant frameworks that are currently shaping sustainability conversations in Africa. So you have the UN Global SDG Framework or the Global Compact, you have GRI, you have UNEP-FI, IFC standards, and the Equator Principle. And if you look at all of them, there is no African voice if you argue that. So what I want to leave you with here is that, is there a way we can also bring Africa into the conversation? We have Agenda 2063, which is the African Union coming together, presenting to us a vision for Africa. And how can we connect with that? And how can we also leverage Afrocapitalism, which is something I've been working on. And I also did a quick search and to say, how can Afrocapitalism fit into the AU Agenda 2060? And it makes a good fit. So I think what I want to leave with is a question is to, how can we create an authentic African assessment or measurement of sustainability that is fit for purpose, that also speaks to the agenda Africa cares about, which is Agenda 2063. So I wish to leave you with these thoughts, and hopefully they can guide us in our conversations today. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Kenneth Amaechi, for that profound keynote address, where you have indeed made a number of thoughtful statements to get us thinking and further thinking about the topic we're discussing today. I'll probably just summarize with that quote, that not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. Thank you very much once again. We appreciate it. We'd like to go into the panel discussion now, and I will be introducing the moderator for the panel session. Mr. Olumide Lala is the co-founder and director of Climate Transition Limited. He has devoted his career to helping business leaders and governments find solutions to the global challenges of climate change, sustainable finance, and capital markets infrastructure development gaps. He has over 20 years capital market experience, holds an MBA from the Imperial College London, a master's degree in business systems analysis and design, as well as a bachelor's in accounting. Mr. Olumide, it's so good to have you here today.
Good morning, Ikena, and thank you very much for such a generous introduction. It's always very difficult to follow Prof. Ken whenever he speaks. He leaves us with a lot of challenges, I assume. But I would say that I have a very able panel today to provide some insight into some of the discussions, some of the things which the Prof had spoken about, but more importantly, some discussion points which would be of interest, not just necessarily to sustainability itself, but the development of the market. So without further ado, standing on current and existing protocols, I should just introduce my able panelists. Starting with, and of course, one always starts with the ladies first. So I will start with Professor Carol Adams. She's a professor of accounting at Durham University Business School in the UK. She's been kind enough to stay up. She's actually out in Melbourne at the moment. So it is a good evening to you, Carol. Next is Mrs. Eunice Sampson, who is a director, climate change and sustainability at Ernst & Young, West Africa. Thank you for joining us. I have also joining us Mr. Ilan Thibon from South Africa, who works and is the ESG lead at Arise BV. Arise BV is an African investment company backed by 3 reputable cornerstone investors, namely Norfund, Rabobank, and FMO. So certainly a big voice. And finally, I have Dr. Innocent Okosa. He's a visiting associate professor of accounting with Caleb University, Imota, Lagos, and the first deputy vice president, Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria. He's also the chair of the Nigerian Integrated Reporting Committee and a member of the African Integrated Reporting Council. So I guess in response to Professor Ken, here's a professor who is also hopefully an African voice. Now, perhaps, I will go into this. Suffice to say that a lot has been said and a lot continues to be said on reporting. Now, when I look at the Nigerian market itself, and if I make reference to the top companies in terms of reporting, perhaps if I could go to Eunice first, just to give us from a consultancy perspective and someone who also used to work for an issuer, in this case, Dangote, amongst others, and of course, a banker. Perhaps you can share with us, as we speak around the world, businesses are increasingly under pressure, as Professor Ken alluded to disclose their non-financial performance to investors and other key stakeholders. Why impact reporting? And how exactly does ESG disclosure support business growth and sustainable development, in your opinion, please?
Okay, thank you very much, Olumide. That is a very great way to start this panel discussion. So the remarkable thing about the sustainable business model is that it compels businesses to look inward and identify the environmental, the social, and the governance risks that come with their day-to-day operations. Now, sustainability inclined businesses are also required to identify and leverage the opportunities that these ESG risks bring, not just to the business itself, but also to the stakeholders. And when all of these key businesses begin to go this route, then the multiplier effect goes beyond just the business space to positively impact the well-being of the physical environment, the society, and then the larger economy. That said, what role does impact reporting play in all of this? Like I always say, the beauty about ESG disclosures is that it enables you see areas where you are strong and performing well as a business. But it also exposes the weak links, especially when sustainability reporting is based on global standards, which clearly define the disclosure requirements. And in the course of analyzing your performance data as a business, you can easily tell where you are not doing well. And as a responsible corporate citizen, this compels you to want to go back to the drawing board and reassess your ESG practices and strategy. Now, if you do not deliberately integrate ESG best practices into your day-to-day operations, then you will have a blank ESG report card in front of you at the end of every year. And this is when some businesses begin to, greenwash, so to speak, reporting performances that are actually not there. So the beauty about ESG impact disclosure is that, in addition to fostering transparency, accountability, and open engagement with key stakeholders, it also compels businesses to take their sustainability journey very, very seriously, ensuring that, the required management framework is in place, the necessary capacity is being built, the required tone at the top, which is very important, is being set and followed through. So ideally, it also ensures that sustainable business policies and practices are deeply entrenched within the business and across the value chain, ensuring that sustainability, goes beyond just, a tick box exercise like Prof had earlier alluded to. Also, when businesses are known to be transparent and accountable to their investors and other key stakeholders, this comes with so many benefits and opportunities, including, for example, public trust, which I think Prof also mentioned earlier, and of course, goodwill, which together helps the business to build its reputational capital that enhances competitiveness and the brand equity. And of course, from the bottom line, the traditional bottom line perspective, there's a huge pool of funds running into trillions of dollars out there in the global investment marketplace and accessible to businesses that are able to stand out in their ESG performance scorecard. Moreover, when institutional investors and development finance institutions want to invest in businesses nowadays, whether they want to provide grants or whatever incentives, one of the first things they watch out for, is the business's sustainability performance and, ESG rating. So you see the likes of MSCI, Sustainalytics, and other ESG rating agencies, assessing business performance by first evaluating their sustainability reports, and then of course they also assess other, information about the business that are out there in the public space. And of course, businesses that disclose their ESG impact are taken much more seriously at the global level and by the, big time investors, than those that do not disclose their performance. And now that globalization has compressed the world into, one single marketplace, businesses that succeed in building strong ESG reputation will always be steps ahead of their local and international competitors and be able to attract the patronage of the ever-increasing pool of ESG-centric investors, talents, clients, and other key business influencers. So that said, the opportunities that ESG disclosures bring to today's businesses are indeed enormous.
Thank you very much, Eunice, for that insight. Now, when I look at the some basic stats, and I look at the premium board, for instance, at the Nigerian Stock Exchange, NGX, as it's now called, I look at in terms of reporting as we know it, and I look at it, perhaps those companies that are there, and I see that a number of them actually have issued standalone reports. And perhaps only one, Dangote, I think comes to mind, Cement. Dangote Cement specifically, have issued an integrated report. Now, it's fair to say that a number of us have heard of financial reports. However, integrated reporting and disclosure, it's something that is somewhat new to some of us, if not most of us. Perhaps I can go to, I think he's also a professor, Innocent at this point. Can you explain what integrated reporting is from a layman's perspective, please, so that we actually have a better understanding? Professor Innocent. You're on mute, sir.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Olumide, for that question.
If you'd be kind enough to also put on your video, that would be useful, sir.
All right. Okay, right. So integrated reporting is, by definition, a concise communication that tells us how an organization's strategy, governance, performance, and prospects within the context of its external environment lead to the creation, preservation, or erosion of value over time. Well, if I put it that way, maybe it tells the layman nothing. But if we look at it from the viewpoint of material information that a business provides about its organization strategy, its governance, performance, and prospects, in a way that it reflects the commercial, social, and environmental context within which it operates, then maybe it gives us an idea of what we're saying. The Prof has given us an overview of sustainability, and Eunice has talked about impact reporting. But the practice over time is that reporting has evolved in such a way, just like you mentioned, Olumide, that we then have a separate sustainability report and a separate financial report. And these are in silos, so to say. So what integrated reporting is trying to do is to connect to all the information that enables an investor to make a more informed assessment of the business. If a business is able to tell us its strategy, its governance structure, then its future prospect, all within the context of its environment, which embed the sustainability issues we're talking about, whereby you no longer just limit this information on financial, then investors are able to make a more informed assessment and decision of the business. So when we talk about the value the business creates is within the context of integrated reporting capitals, which are 6 in number: the manufactured capital, the financial capital, social and relationship capital, natural capital, human capital, intellectual capital. So the increases and decreases, because we are talking about creation, preservation, and erosion of this capital, then we have a more broad view of the business and business performance. So if we talk about performance, performance is no longer restricted to financial performance, but performance across the capitals that a business uses and affects. So that is what distinguishes integrated reporting from the sustainability report and the financial report that are in silos, so to say. And the business is the better for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just before I go to another professor, something I'm getting confused right now. I feel like I'm back at the university studying accounting all of a sudden again. You know, you made reference to all these capitals, and there seems to be a lot of capitals and performances going on here. You know, look, I guess the one person that seems to be relevant more so here is the man who actually has the money. So, you know, I think the DG Sec in his keynote speech said something about cash follows disclosure. So maybe at this point, it'd be a good segue to go to Ilan Thibon, who is our investor here, or represent the investor voice here. You know, Ilan, maybe I could ask you at this point, you know, as an investor, actually, you know, who uses some of this information, what are your expectations from a company in respect of the non-disclosure ESG reporting? Okay. What are you looking to see in this report?
Firstly, just to clarify, I'm far away from being a professor. There's always been something getting in the way, a better opportunity. So I'm still chasing that master's mirage in the distance. But speaking directly to your question, I think firstly, as an investor, too many people see reporting as the objective. And sometimes, frequently, what we see is that an organization's management, leadership, they task their communications department to develop a sustainability report. Maybe the marketing department gets involved, and then they kind of forget about it. It's sort of a task handed to those departments, and management walks away. And really, from an investor point of view, ESG reporting, the non-financial metrics disclosure, is not the objective. Rather, for us, it's a lever for change and for driving sustainable transformation within the organization. As a shareholder, we want to see via the reporting evidence of integrated thinking across, you know, the commercial implications of your financial capital, your social capital, your natural capital. We want to see evidence of integrated strategy across these 3 capitals, not just in terms of impacts. There's been a lot of talk about, you know, impacts of companies on the environment, on you know, human rights and social capital, but also an understanding of the dependencies of the company on these capitals. You know, companies need a healthy, educated workforce. They need a working and functioning justice system. Those are social capitals. They need clean air and water and so on and so forth. So it has to be a lever for change. It's not the objective in itself. And in that sense, I think it's quite similar to financial reporting. You know, investors don't just want to see numbers for the sake of taking the numbers. They also want to understand, you know, how did management strategy impact these numbers, and how are these numbers impacting the strategy going forward? And it's the exact same, I think, on the non-financial metrics reporting side. So it's not an objective; it's a means to an end. I think that's a critical thing.
Thank you very much for that insight there. At this point, making reference yet again to one of Professor Ken's comment about standards and where they come from, and perhaps the African voice. But I know we're speaking African and probably even extending it to the emerging markets here. Maybe I will go to Professor Carol Adams, who is a real professor, by the way, unlike Ilan and myself. If I can ask you, in your opinion, what are the main challenges for sustainability reporting in developing markets? Prof. Carol.
Well, yes, thank you for that question. And just to pick up on a few earlier points, if I may, before I answer your question. There is actually a Nigerian on the board of the Global Reporting Initiative. It is a global organization. It's not Nigerian, but it is global. And I also want to pick up on the integrated thinking thing. And this comes to your question about sustainability reporting. I don't think integrated thinking is enough for developing markets. I think we need, and I think Eunice touched on this also. I think what we need is sustainable development thinking. So emerging markets, the countries in emerging markets are all different. They have clearly differences in economic and social priorities across countries, and that is in part determined by different political and cultural contexts. In South Africa, for example, where integrated reporting is mandatory, many companies use integrated reporting in a different way from in the integrated reporting framework, where the focus is on enterprise value. Now, I think in a developing market, we need to think a bit broader than enterprise value, because governments are faced with a lot of challenges. There's a lot of environmental issues, and when globalization really took off during the last century, that's when sustainability reporting became really important, because large multinational companies were going to countries with less regulation. There was a lot of pollution, not treating labor very well, bringing people into the country as leaders rather than developing people in those countries. So governments need also to have some sort of accountability by multinational corporations and their own large companies about their impacts on society and the environment. And so this sort of enterprise value focus, I think, is really not sufficient for any country, but particularly not appropriate for developing countries, developing markets. Multinational corporations need to be monitoring activities in their supply chain. They do that because it's a reputation issue, so they need that accountability about the impacts of companies. We need that kind of reporting. And when companies are selling to developed nations, selling products to developed nations, those countries will require audits of their supply chain and sustainability audits, and looking at those standards and the impacts of companies in those in their supply chain, also around sustainability. So we really need to be looking at the impacts of organizations, and that's going beyond this enterprise value integrated thinking approach to a more sustainable development thinking, which is about putting sustainable development really at the heart of the way the organisation works and what it's striving for.
Thank you very much, Professor Carroll, for that insight there. I believe the Nigerian gentleman to whom you refer is Mr. Joseph Owolabi, who is on the global board. I think is the current.
No, it's a woman. The Keme Masala Olawola.
Well, I'm sure we'll go and search that and find out and make sure she becomes a wonderful voice and prominent promoter of this opportunity here. Maybe I'll go back. This is probably a segue from what you said there. I'll go back to Eunice at this point, who is not just a consultant, one who obviously helps companies achieve that strategy that we're trying to put together, and also a banker. I noticed that at least 4 or 5 banks sit on the premium board of the stock exchange, and I've done standalone reporting. One of which is Zenith Bank, which I believe is your old friend of the house, as it were. So maybe I'll ask you this question, and you can help us. How can businesses leverage these opportunities that impact reporting actually brings? And what does an effective impact report strategy look like? Eunice.
Okay, thank you, Olumide. The way I see it, and from my many experiences, an effective impact disclosure strategy should start with having a well thought out ESG management framework in place that significantly balances the importance that the business places, not just on their financial performance, like we have all been re-echoing here, but also on their non-financial performance. And having a clear plan and targets for driving this strategy to ensure that the desired goals and objectives are met. Also, it is important to integrate ESG principles and standards across the value chain, because if you do not implement best environmental, social, and governance practices, then you really do not have anything to disclose at the end of the year. I mean, which is why I agree with, all that has been said today, that, it's not just the end game shouldn't be the sustainability report, but the impact that you are reporting and how factual those impacts are. So to be effective, ESG needs to become a way of business, the underlying business model, and a corporate culture mainstreamed across every function and department of the business, and a key driver of every business decision that is made and every major action that is taken as a business. So a good ESG integration strategy would require the business owners and decision makers to consistently ask questions such as, what are the ESG issues in our human resource management system? How do we improve on them? How do we improve on, the way we treat our people? How do we improve on, the way we manage our people? So what are the ESG issues in our production processes? How do we improve on them, leveraging technology, innovation, enhanced operational practices, and so on? They also need to ask themselves, what are the ESG issues in our supply chain? How do we mitigate the risks and enhance the opportunities arising from these supply chain issues, and so on? So such enterprise-wide ESG thinking will ensure that a business succeeds in building a sustainable brand that will remain competitive, profitable, and of course, outlive many generations. Then, of course, you also need to have a workable impact disclosure framework in place, one that is scalable and in line with best reporting standards. I say scalable because even though many of us might not agree, but I believe that some high impact small and medium scale businesses can actually adopt impact reporting strategy, but at a scale and scope that is commensurate with their sustainability maturity stage and the ESG profile of their organization. So we always recommend starting small and simple, and then gradually scaling up the scope and complexity of the disclosure framework as the business also grows in scale and also in complexity. So related to this is the issue of materiality. Sustainability and impact reporting should not be seen as a one-cap-fits-all tick box exercise. Every organization should disclose what is material to them, to their line of business, and of course, their key stakeholders' concerns should be addressed. When impact reporting is aligned with materiality considerations, then what you see is a sustainability report that is compact, straight to the point, informative, and gives relevant answers to the very pertinent questions that address the concerns of the business's key stakeholders. So importantly as well, there is the question of capacity. Sustainability and impact reporting is increasingly becoming a key regulatory and institutional performance measurement yardstick. But several institutions, unfortunately, institutions that are due for impact reporting still do not have the tools and human capacity to be able to do this effectively. And so it is important that businesses build the required capacity to deliver on their impact reporting commitments and in line with whatever the disclosure standards that they have adopted, whether it is GROI, as has been mentioned here, integrated reporting, or even now that IFRS, is set to bring a new perspective to the sustainability disclosure space. All of us could recall that, during COP26 that held in Glasgow last month, a major fallout was the unveiling of a new international sustainability standards board by the IFRS Foundation. And this board is tasked with the responsibility to develop a comprehensive global baseline for, of sustainability disclosure standards that businesses will be required to comply with going forward. So now what it means is that, in addition to your regular traditional financial reporting, sustainability reporting is, increasingly becoming a must, not just a nice to have. So with this development, it will no longer be business as usual, as ESG impact reports, as usual for ESG impact reporters. So disclosure requirement is expected to get more stringent, detailed, and compelling for the high impact businesses. And lastly on this, I must not fail to add that effective impact reporting strategy is highly driven by data centrism. In fact, data is the new gold in the ESG space. But the pertinent question remains, how accurate, how verifiable, and how factual is the data on which businesses base their ESG performance measurement and disclosures? What is the integrity of the available sustainability disclosure data? This is why ESG consultants, such as Ernst & Young, for example, are increasingly being required to carry out independent, assurance services on sustainability reports before they are actually published, to add that extra layer of integrity and credibility to the impact disclosure that businesses make. So without adequate and credible data, you cannot document, measure, let alone accurately disclose your ESG impact as a business. Thank you.
You speak a lot of things that need to be done and should be done. Standards, as Professor Ken made reference to, seem to be coming at us from the outside. Of course, we've got the domestic standards as well to bear with. You mentioned capacity, you mentioned external verification. All of this just seems plenty. Now, just before I go back to, because this is actually a pertinent point, but just before I go back to Professor Carroll, maybe I'll ask Ilan yet again at this point. Because you also mentioned materialism, which obviously Professor Ken referred to. I guess I like to follow the money. So I guess a question for Ilan will be, what is material to you? And is that the same, is that judged, the sense of materialism, is it judged from the perspective of the company issuing the reports? You're on mute, Ilan.
So I think materiality, whatever is going to be significantly material to a stakeholder in a company For me, it's difficult to imagine how something can be of high materiality to a stakeholder, be it management, be it important to the workforce or to the community or the regulators, and how that same issue cannot also, by default, also be material to the shareholder. So I think that the perspective of investors is changing, where we are now understanding that what is material to key stakeholders in the organization is de facto material to us as shareholders as well. And so that's what we want to see reflected in the approach and the thinking of the company through their reporting. I don't know if that answers your question over there.
Just staying with that thought, because Eunice made reference to data. I often say that in God we trust, everybody else bring data. I guess what we're trying to look at here in terms of materiality performance is the risk that all of this actually potentially brings to bear when it comes to business continuity, as it were, the sustainability of the business and its impact on society. If I could just go slightly further with that flow, do you, in your opinion, think that this should be made mandatory by the regulators? And if so, how eminent is this relative to the risk that is facing us from things like climatic changes, ESG changes, transition risk changes? And just because we've often focused on football, but when you look at the transition risk associated with all our businesses, how eminent do you think this is, and how, in your opinion, should reporting of such nature be made mandatory by the regulators?
So, for me, a lot of this comes down to just timing. I think it's inevitable that it will become mandatory, and who drives that mandatory reporting, whether it's the global investment community, whether it's particular regulators like NGX or the Nairobi Stock Exchange or the central banks. I think that it almost becomes it's almost closing the barn door before once the horse is already bolted. This is coming. Companies need to know this. It's just a matter of timing and who's going to pull the trigger first, frankly. And this is not just Nigeria. This is globally. So will it become mandatory? Should it become mandatory? In my opinion, yes. But regardless of if my opinion was no, it's happening and it's going to happen.
Right. So full disclosure, I'm clearly a friend of the house. I used to work at the exchange, or I've been told I shouldn't refer to it as the exchange anymore. But I used to work in the Nigerian capital market. So I guess I've got skin in the game. Look, it's coming. We have no choice. The risk is facing us. And like I said, money, risk, performance, they're all associated one way or the other. Maybe I'll go back to Prof. Carroll at this point, because we made reference earlier to challenges facing developing markets. One of the things that you often hear when reports are issued, or when I speak to issuers, the first thing you hear is, well, when the international investor comes, we'll provide this, but for our local investor, this is okay. Now, I find that very disturbing, because it speaks to me that the local or the domestic investor should be treated less, is not as astute, and perhaps the local investor or domestic investor is not as on top of things as they should. We've talked about capacity building, we've talked about data. Now, in your own opinion, because I know you've done a lot of work in this area, let's go back again yet to the challenges, but this time, how do we turn that around? How do we turn the risk into opportunities? How do we turn their challenges into practicable steps? What are your findings and your thoughts in how we can move this forward, Professor Carroll?
Well, I do agree with Ellen that, what matters to stakeholders has to matter to investors and for the longevity of the organization as well. So there are benefits to the organization of looking after stakeholders and thinking about the impacts of the organization on stakeholders. And, I really agree. You can't determine which of these impacts are going to be financially material at some time in the future. So you have to be thinking about those impacts of the organization. And that has many benefits for the organization itself. And Kenneth spoke to some of these. So the process of engaging with stakeholders to determine what the material impacts of the organization are is a really important exercise. It's about building trust, but it's more than that. It's about being alerted to what your risks and opportunities are as an organization. So if you're talking to your stakeholders about your material impacts, they're letting you know where the potential risks are for your organization. And through that engagement, you should also be able to identify opportunities, perhaps opportunities for new products or services, or ways of adapting your business model to be more attuned with sustainable development. And that's good for the, that's good for the organization. It's also a protection against reputational damage. And that comes back to the issue of building trust. It can reduce costs. It can save you money, for example, reducing energy consumption, reducing packaging and so on. Good for the environment and reduce costs. But we really need companies to be going beyond that, to be thinking about what does it mean for product development? What do environmental impacts mean for product development, for example? What are the opportunities for new products and services? And how can we educate our customers around the differences in products, the changes to packaging and so on, and the changes to their consumption patterns in order to reduce the impact of the organization on the environment and negative impacts on society. And Eunice mentioned the ISSB. Now, I would hope that focuses on financial statement impacts of sustainable development issues, because I do really strongly believe we need that mandatory reporting for the impacts of organizations on sustainable development. And I do think that must be mandatory. And that's what the GRI standards look at. The other benefit of following those standards is that there are disclosures about processes. I don't believe disclosures should be focused just on data. And there I'm agreeing with Kenneth. Because if organizations are disclosing, say, their approach to engaging with stakeholders, or the governance oversight of that process, for example, the governance oversight of integrating these issues into strategy, then they're going to be improving their processes. And if those processes are externally assured, that's where you're really starting to add value to the organization in terms of getting that input and feedback on those processes. You're on mute.
The benefits of working remotely, I guess. Sorry about that, folks. Just before we go to the audience for some questions, and by the way, audience, please, I like to believe that, the good people here have spoken a lot and you must have some questions. So please, your questions on the chat, that would be great. Just before I go to the audience, however, maybe I'll go back to Professor Innocent at this point. And I know we've spoken about mandates, what should be mandatory, what shouldn't be mandatory. In life, I find that apart from doctors, that people tend to put a lot of faith in accountants and auditors. So maybe I'll give not just the final word to you, but on this point, clearly reporting is important. And we've just spoken about, why companies should report. Maybe you could just highlight some more the benefits to the company, because you see, we often see sustainability as a cost to the company. Very difficult to see where the benefit is. It's often a cost. We see it as a cost, especially for small companies and what they have to do. And if you look at banks as well, scope 1, 2, and 3, especially scope 3, the extent to which you have to report. perhaps going back to integrated reporting, what are those benefits that you think, if I look at it from a cost-benefit analysis perspective, what are those benefits that the companies will get or likely to get from developing this strategy that would negate the obvious costs to building capacity internally, people, process, technology, making all of this more integrated, in your opinion?
All right, yeah, so I think Professor Carroll has given an insight into so many of those advantages that corporations stand to gain engaging in a reporting that shows how their strategy addresses the issues that we're talking about. But, you know, we have discussed these things generally, and I want to draw particular attention at what we're discussing from the perspective of the organization. I hear impact reporting, and the tendency is for us to think that corporations will genuinely report on their impact on, say, social and environmental effect of their operation. I want to draw attention that corporations are not likely going to do that. And that's why most research carried out to actually interrogate corporate reporting within the context of social and environmental will always show something like greenwashing, because there is this perception that if I disclose to shareholders that my operation causes environmental damage, then investors are going to be scared away. If we say yes, it helps assess risk, but it's unlikely that organizations are going to expose the sources of risk to the environment that it causes. And so it will be good for us to frame the discussion around the right education to be given to corporations on what they stand to benefit engaging in sustainability integrated reporting. And I think those are the things that Carol has mentioned from the perspective that you then take it as a strategy to look into the entire operation of the business, not just around governance, but around your product. How does it help you to improve your product services, maybe the quality of product that you produce or services that you deliver to your clients? Look at it also from the perspective of how it helps you improve your costs. Because if we're talking about the environment and you're looking at it from the perspective that if you reduce the impact of your environment of some of these things, think about banks, for instance, that use huge generator and cost diesel and that incurs huge diesel costs, then they pollute the environment. If they look at it from that perspective, how does it improve our efficiency and reduce costs that we incur in these sustainable issues? Waste disposal. Well, we spoke to one accountant that because part of the study that of my research interest is the area of the role of professional accountant in sustainability in the organization. So an accountant told us how he was able to convert a company's waste from a cost to a revenue generating activity. So they used to pay for this waste to be disposed of. But they now have to go and find somebody who can collect this waste and convert this waste into raw materials that they use, like the circular economy that Kenneth talked about. Even in terms of, so we see that sustainability issue, as we are talking about, if you now embed it in your strategy, it tells you how you can convert this issue to revenue generating activity, efficiency of the organization. Now, when you look at it from that perspective and you report accordingly, you then produce a more transparent report that could help investors make a more informed decision. So that builds trust between the business and the investors, and then the society as a whole. Then the capital that flows, which the DG Stock Exchange talked about, when investors are not confident of disclosures within a capital market, capital flow elsewhere. Capital flowing elsewhere will then flow to the business because you have produced information that engenders trust in the mind of investors, so they come to you. More transparent disclosure also leads to what we call a reduction in capital. And the reason why it leads to a reduction in cost of capital is because investors are now more confident of the transparent information you have provided, and they are able to assess your risk. And then that lowers their risk perception, and then that is a less cost of capital to you. Also, it provides you with a much better information for your overall governance. Then performance assessment is enhanced because we no longer look at performance just from the financial perspective, but from the entire gamut of what drives the business, the capital that the business is using. So I think the Nigerian Stock Exchange will get to that point where he's able to articulate this so that businesses voluntarily engage in this reporting, and we do not have to rely on mandating it. So I have a different perspective about mandating sustainability and integrated reporting at this stage. And why I have a different perspective is that we cannot mandate what the market does not understand. So the question is, does the market in which we operate, I'm not talking about our own Nigerian capital market, do they understand what we're talking about? Yes, there is the premium board companies that are required to prepare sustainability reports, and they all prepare silos sustainability reports. But go and look at those sustainability reports to see the information that is contained there, and you'll see that they will tell you they are following GRI, they are following, some may tell you they follow SSB, but none of these standards they are making reference to are they following in the real sense of it. What you see are pictures of events that they carried out, which from their perspective are more of corporate social responsibility activities. And that's the perspective they looked at it. So I once examined the sustainability report of the 6 premium companies on just one item, one sustainability issue, water. And what did I see? Vague reporting. That you cannot lay hand on any issue that contributes to the achievement of SDG 6 as required by the SDG 6 indices that we can use to measure contribution to that. So I think the exchange needs to create and promote awareness for investors, institutional investors, who are expected to demand this information, and among the professionals that are supposed to help produce this information first, and before we can then begin to think about mandating the integrated reporting and sustainability reporting. So that will be my practical approach to the issue. Thank you.
I think I was on mute. I was getting very warm until you came up. Just all of a sudden, my will to leave was sort of diminished a bit. greenwashing, and a number of things that you made reference to. It looks to me like we don't know what we know until somebody tells us what we know that we don't know, if that makes any sense. Your view is you can't mandate when people don't even know what they're meant to be looking for. But at the same time, there's a risk that people think that all you have to do is just write one report and the investor will come rushing in. The problem is that's the beginning, because the moment you start reporting, then you're going to start digging further and further and further and further. And the more you dig, the more you find out how much more work you have to do. So I guess the conundrum here is you dig further, the investor asks for more. For him to put in more money, you need to produce more. We'll eventually get there, but the problem is, and as Professor Ken referred to, is, who is setting the standards and where the standards coming from, and how soon is this going to come at us? But just like Ilan said, we have no choice. It's going to come at us. And the biggest problem we have in a country like Nigeria that is very petrochemical centric is that if we don't change, and Prof. Ken and I have this conversation on and on and on forever and a day. The bottom line is if we don't change, there's a risk that we would walk into a brick wall at some point. So I guess my view is, look, before I go to my final question, we've got some questions here from the audience, and it makes reference to one of the ones that Prof. Innocent was talking about, which is, what are the explicit variables in the financial statements that can represent sustainability reporting? And then the other one, which I think also is aligned with that, which perhaps we might have answered, was what impact does ESG integrated reporting have on our corporate financial reporting? I think to some extent that the second question has been answered, but that first one speaks to the explicit variables that we need to pay attention to. And I don't know which one of you wants to go for that. What are the explicit variables in the financial statement that can represent sustainable reporting?
Okay, let me take that. I think the way the question is framed also may be confusing, because you do not transform sustainability reporting into financial, or financial into sustainability. But we can see an attempt of financial reporting to capture a little bit of the issues that we discuss in sustainability reporting. So if you're looking at such element, it is to what extent does the financial reporting capture the elements of sustainability reporting? And to that extent, we can talk about IAS 37 on provisions, because an omnibus provisions which can accommodate issues around sustainability. When you make provision for that, that comes closest to the variable in sustainability reporting that you can find in financial reporting, and all that related issues. The climate disclosure task force, which Kenneth referred to, drew a map of how financial reporting is connected to sustainability, and made reference to about some standards, which included the IAS 16 in the areas of commissioning, IAS 37, IAS 32, so IFRS 7 on financial disclosures, IFRS 9, and those related issues that connect to sustainability. So I think it's from that perspective that that question can be addressed. Thank you.
Professor Carroll.
Well, I would say we need to look at asset impairment, particularly in the oil and gas sector, and potential liabilities arising from sustainability issues. So that's a financial statement part of it, but we really must do the sustainability reporting, the impact of organizations on sustainable development, on society, on the environment, must be there too, because that does have financial consequences down the track. And we could spend a lot of time trying to work out what those were now, but we'd just be guessing. So we need to report the actual impacts. And I do believe it needs to be mandatory, and we may not know how to do it now. Not everybody knows how to do it now, but look at the resources that go into financial reporting because it's mandatory, compared to the resources that go into sustainability reporting in an organization. Which of those is most significant for the future of the organization? Well, I would say an organization cannot survive long term unless we start aligning with sustainable development, unless we're thinking about sustainable development all the time through the through the purpose of the organization, through the strategy, really integrating it into the strategy and the business model. So the financial reporting part is important, but I do really strongly believe we need to see the reporting of impacts of the organization and the sustainable development risks to the organization. Those need to be mandatory too, and then the resources will follow to that area and people will suddenly work out how to do it.
Ilan, perhaps I can come to you.
Yeah, I think just in terms of which metrics in the financial report are material to sustainability, that comes to one of the points I was talking about, integrated thinking and strategy, is that, this is what we want to see that management understands. Which of their financial metrics, based on their specific business, this will change by sector, if you're a financial firm or if you're a mining firm or whatever the case may be, but we want to see that they understand which financial metrics are being impacted and are related to impacts and dependencies on social and natural capital. So for me, the question sort of begs the following question as well. You tell us, your management of the company, demonstrate to us that you understand that. And maybe on that sort of note, I just want to very briefly, Professor Carroll, she mentioned about integrated thinking focused on enterprise value versus moving to integrated approach on sustainable development. Just to quickly, I want to be clear of you from an investor perspective, certainly speaking on behalf of Arise, and I think this is increasingly common view in the investment community, is that there isn't a distinction so much anymore for us, that a company which is destructive of social capital, natural capital, that imperils the company's enterprise value. And from an investor point of view, even if it may not imperil not so much that specific company, it imperils our portfolio. So, for us, it's an imperative that companies are looking to maximize enterprise value through an approach that contributes to sustainable development. The two are intrinsically linked for us as a shareholder.
Right. Thanks for that interjection, Ilan. We have acronyms such as TCFD, PACTA, PCAF, all of those things being bounced around this and what we need to do, capital reserving for certain type of risk in the future, which, sometimes you ask yourself, how can you even calculate this? Just before I go elaborate on that, maybe I'll bring in Professor Ken, since I've referred to his notes so often during this conversation. Maybe I'll bring in him just to add some thoughts to this discourse at this point.
Thank you very much, Olumide. Very interesting conversation so far. I think the question that sort of triggered some ideas in me was the one about using financial reporting as a benchmark. And I wanted to step away from that because what it does is that it prioritizes finance or financial reporting as the benchmark then to determine what sustainability should look like. So sustainability is being asked in a way to fit into the existing financial report. But also to understand that as much as I love what Innocent does, I often tell him that accounting is forged in many ways, right? Accounting is socially constructed, but sometimes we take accounting as if it's kind of something that's falling from the heavens, right? So, and it's for us to rethink. You have a lot of conventions in accounting, and I doubt them sometimes. So you make them up as you go along, right? As well. So that's kind of a caricature of accounting, but it's sort of moving back and say, how can accounting also change in the light of what we know now about sustainability and where we are going to. How can financial reporting fit into the sustainability narrative? I think that's another way of putting the question. And going to what Ellen was talking about, investors, we also, in a way, assume that we are thinking about these big markets made up of institutional investors. I don't know the depth of the Nigerian capital markets, right? You may find that most companies are not dependent on your institutional investors. So these are people who are doing things, maybe SMEs or medium-sized firms. They don't care much about what you're talking about, right? And if you're talking about long-term, whose long-term is it? In Nigeria, long-term may be as long as 90 days, right? So whereas some might be thinking about 25 years, 30 years, and so on and so forth. So you have a mismatch. So if you take your developed economy perspective where the capital market is significant and institutional investors play significant roles, we may miss the mark because we are thinking about an economic ecology or economy that is different and is made up of small firms, medium-sized firms that are not completely dependent on the capital market. So I think I thought to mention these 2 points about accounting and fitting into sustainability as opposed to sustainability fitting into accounting, and also the fact that you have other sources of money beyond the institutional investors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Ken. The one good thing about bringing intellectuals to a platform is you're always assured of a debate. But he often tells us that companies are already doing this. But look, a number of companies in Nigeria are beginning to consider integrated reporting. Whether they understand what they're doing or not is at this point, from my perspective, secondary. The fact that they're actually considering it is a good start. So the question then is, how do you build that capacity? Professor Carroll had some thoughts around whether this is appropriate for emerging markets such as Nigeria's at this time, given the level of maturity. Is there a middle ground on what appropriate is for now? Look, I often say there's a saying that says, to whom much is given, much is respected. In my opinion, that's a quacky way of thinking about life, because to whom much is given, much is demanded. And the reason why we're sat here is, even though Professor Ken says, we got SMEs and who do not depend on the capital markets at this point. Well, the capital market is there for a reason, is to bring about and pull together funds from those who have it to develop those companies that do not have it, such that at some point they now depend on the capital market. It's about growing the pie. For too long, we've always talked about the size of the capital market in terms of dollars, which is a stupid way of thinking about it, because every time you devalue the naira, the market shrinks. But even if you look at the absolute numbers of naira itself, we still need to develop the market, and you need investor money to develop the market. Now, whether that investor is international, domestic, from my perspective, doesn't matter. You still need the money. And you need certain standards to give the investors confidence. So I guess my question at this point, based on the last question I asked, which actually came from the very top, that was actually the CEO's question, by the way. In terms of what we need to do today, I guess it kind of brings me to my final question to all of you. And that includes you, Professor Ken, because we've had this conversation a number of times. What are the practical steps that we can take in collaboration with the regulators to mainstream integrated reporting for the Nigerian companies? And that's talking about capacity building, the whole gamut, knowledge, skills. Too many of our folks are running off to Canada, by the way. We need to retain them so that we can build a capacity. So what are the things that we can actually do today? Practical steps from people like Eunice, who is the consultant in the room. And I will start with you, by the way, Eunice, and the rest of us, that we can bring to bear, collaborate with the regulator, the capital market, APEX regulator, the SEC, the NGX group regulators, and every capital market stakeholder to move this market forward, so that we're not having this same conversation in another 2-3 years' time. More so that COP27 is in Egypt. What is it that we can do that we can actually go and showcase there to say we're moving this agenda forward, which would then bring people like Ilan more money into the market and encourage the domestic investors to mimic some of the requirements effectively that the foreign investors are looking for, but on the basis that, as Professor Innocent says, we're not going to be doctoring the numbers just to make it look good. Yeah, how do we build not just a sustainable environment, but one that has integrity. Question for you. Starting with Eunice, please.
Okay, Olumide, thank you very much. So I think we really need a lot of these discussions to even start with. Like a lot of the panelists have alluded to during this session, there is still a lot of knowledge gap about ESG, okay? And that is a major challenge. And, I always say something, even a lot of the companies that are not taking their environmental and social stewardship seriously, the reason is very simple. So at times we want to think that it's because of their overzealousness to make profit. I don't see it only from this perspective. I think a major challenge is that they don't even understand the level, of the risks that we face as humanity and even as businesses. So a lot of knowledge sharing, a lot of awareness creation is required. Even the investors themselves need to understand that, they have a lot of influence, right? They can actually influence, good behavior among their investees. So even the investors need to understand that. And the businesses themselves need to understand that it is no longer business as usual. In my perspective, from the very outset of the Industrial Revolution, sustainability and business thinking were actually supposed to go together from the outset, right? So we are having this discussion very late in the day. So now we are doing a lot of backward integration. What we would have started hundreds of years ago, we are just about to kickstart, and which is why there's a lot of pressure on all of us, including the businesses. So that said, I would like to talk about the capital market, the efforts that the NGX, for example, has been making to integrate sustainability best practices within at least the listed businesses. So, I mean, the NGS Sustainability Disclosure Guidelines at least have prompted the biggest listed businesses to kickstart or improve on their sustainability reporting practices, as the case may be. So the guidelines, are no doubt good ESG checks and balances for the listed companies, encouraging them to pay attention to their environmental, social, and governance performance. However, the way I see it, the next steps for the NGS Sustainability Disclosure Guidelines would have to include extending, compliance beyond just members of the premium board to other listed companies. And of course, they can do this in tiers, depending on the sizes of the different companies that are listed, depending on the impact, the industry where they play, how the footprints, the ESG footprints of those different players, and maybe put like a year or 6 months gap, for implementation to be enforced. I really do think that there is a need for the listed businesses, which are actually the major businesses in the country, to be more follow through on their ESG practices. And the exchange has a big influence, in doing this. Also, there is the need to continuously update the guidelines to reflect key emerging sustainability issues, such as this climate risk and energy transition considerations and so on. This is very important because these are the trending issues right now, and they are very, very important, for business sustainability and also for the, well-being of, the human beings and the stakeholders of the businesses. Also, I think the NGS needs to set clear KPIs from this, from the guidelines, and consistently track compliance, with these KPIs among listed companies. And lastly, on this issue, I think the NGS, needs to leverage peer reviews and benchmarking mechanisms, as well as introduce ESG performance rating to further deepen and incentivize the, sustainability compliance among the listed businesses. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Okay, so before I move on to the next person to answer, let's start from a very low base here now, yeah? Because, we've made a session to the fact that our market is not as developed as the global markets, right? So we're starting from a low base. We're asking the regulator to mandate, we're asking the regulator to ensure compliance. So if we're starting from a low base, we're assuming that all of us don't even know what we do not know. And clearly there's a need for more education, more skill. There's a question here, what does an ESG person actually look like in terms of education, experience, given the fast moving nature of this sector? If you had to even make reference to the staff of the regulator, what sort of skill set? Because look, it's one thing to start taking metrics. What's the skill set of the person who is actually going to be that policeman? What does he look like? What does he, in practical terms, what are the kind of skills that the regulator should be attracting to get this job done, to set the regulation, to set the metrics, to set the parameters that the rest of us will follow? What are those type of skills required within the companies? What are the risks associated with what we're even looking at that would impact our companies today? We talk about transition risk. So it's a fast moving environment. Some of the things coming at us, we don't even know. Even physical risk today is getting more ferocious. So even calculating that, the insurance companies, for instance, I'm not even part of this conversation and should be. So we talk about the investors. Where are the insurance companies who even insure our investments? Some of the assets that we have today that the banks are vested in, in all the sectors, in their various locations that are being impacted by climatic risks and ESG requirements. All of a sudden, I'm getting worried here because, excuse my English, but it sounds like we're just speaking English here. We're just talking theory. How do we actually practicalize all of this? It's imminent, as Ilan said. It's in our face already, as Carol said. In fact, you could argue that the horse is bolted, as Eunice said. But Professor Ken says to us that, perhaps, why the standards are so high up, they're so foreign. We need to localize them. And of course, Professor Innocent says that some information has been doctored out of fear. I say that the more you dig, the more you're required to dig some more. So all of a sudden, I'm sitting there thinking, it's like a deer in front of headlights, or just standing on a rail line in front of a train. In the last few 2 or 3 minutes, yet again, I go back to the question, what are the things that we can do in collaboration with the regulator to start building some sort of manual, practical stuff in terms of training, engagement with investors, some sort of program that we can bring to bear, that all of us sat around here can come and educate, upskill the market, such that what we are looking for, we will get. That is what I want to hear from us today. Please, my good people, educate me.
Can I go for it?
Please, Ken, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I think you asked a very interesting question. And I would say, education matters a lot. As much as you want to address those that are currently in the market, I also think that we also need to address the supply side of things. So think about those who are currently in university studying finance or accounting. How is the NGX as an organization working with them at the moment? Because what you want to do is to catch them young, get that thinking right before they come into the capital market. And what happens from our own experience is that when students are young in the universities, you see a lot of socialists, leftists, and so on and so forth. But what happens to them when they go to the world of work? Something captures them there, right? Meaning that the world of work has other incentives that can, in a way, corrupt their thinking. So how can NGX at this point make sure that we have them right so that when they come in, they can continue and sustain that thinking? How can NGS work with ICANN, other professional bodies, to also ensure that their curricula are fit for purpose, so to speak? So that's one practical way, if you ask me. Maybe they're already doing these things, but they can do more with more universities. Go beyond Lagos. Every person is in Lagos, right? Nigeria is more than Lagos. And I keep telling you, NGS needs to reach out to other universities in Nigeria or other professional bodies beyond ICANN. there is also a point I think we can work on. This is not just for NGS. I'm currently trying to develop a sustainability data. I think we talked about data being the new gold. For me, it's a way, once you have that data, it's through informal governance. You don't need necessarily to say you must produce your data. But imagine having that data, and that data becomes a source of, government can leverage it to create incentives for companies. Investors can use the data to assess what companies are doing. Consumers can use the data for better information. Okay, so that's one. Then you also ask the question, what sort of regulator do we want? What sort of skills do we want? And if I tell you the skills we want, you may be surprised, right? I would say the best thing we need for now is good thinking. And good thinking is probably what philosophy offers you, right? Where you can say, oh, philosophy is out of this world. But all of the things we are talking about here, ESG, is about market failure. And what is market failure? Market failure, it's not static, it keeps changing. I'll give you an instance. Today, biofuel is seen as a good thing to do. Okay, if we can go ahead and invest in it, it's better than fossil fuel. But what happens when biofuel starts to crowd out food production? The same thing that is good today becomes bad tomorrow. Tobacco used to be good and we enjoyed it, but given what we know about tobacco today, we are changing our position. Oil and gas used to be good before. We are demonizing it today. Alcohol, who knows what will become of alcohol in the next few years? So again, for me, it's about thinking, having people who are able to assess every situation and make good judgment that will help the economy at that point in time and society at large. So these are
Let me stop you there.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
We're fast run out of time because I want to hear from Professor Carol. Just a minute, please, if you can. Just a minute. If I go to Elan.
Well, I think we need to look at not just knowledge, but also aptitude. We need people who care about sustainable development, who are not just looking to earn a big salary. And so we need people who can deal with complexity, not people who just want to see everything in numbers, in currency, for example. We need people who can deal with lots of different types of data and information and make assessments around the impacts on sustainable development. And we need people who can think holistically, join the dots between the various issues that are going on around sustainable development, the interconnections between them and their impact on societies and the economy. And in terms of integrated reporting, you were talking about mandating that. If we're going to look at that kind of approach, then we really need to change the focus from creating value for the enterprise to creating value for the enterprise, society, and the environment, and make that really explicit. When we're talking about looking at risks, we need to make sustainable development risks explicit. Because if you just talk about risks and you talk about enterprise value, that's interpreted as the status quo, business as usual, and we don't get the change that we need.
Thank you very much, Prof. What I get from that is, the companies does not exist in isolation. The company works because the society works. So the stakeholder must just go beyond the individual stakeholders. We must connect the dots and bring together thinking. Elan, please.
Yeah, sorry, I think there's been a lot of topics discussed over there. Maybe you can just restate the question, so I'm focusing on it.
That's my question, and the reason why I bring this question to bear is that 10 years ago, some people might know this, 10 years ago, I joined, I've been an investor in the Nigerian capital markets for many years. I actually joined the Nigerian capital market as one of the son of the soil, as they say. And I've always been a part of that. Now, the question is, and how can we collaborate with the regulator, the market as a whole, to bring to bear the desired change that we want to see from an investment perspective?
Well, geez, I think probably there's room for improvement in how investors engage with the regulators on this matter would probably be one of the honest answers. Let me just speak a little bit more broadly in terms of what I can see making the biggest impact, and it does relate to education, but not, Professor Kenneth talked about the pipeline. For me, the focus, I engage with CEOs, executive committee members, the board members of large banks across Africa, EcoBank, Equity Bank, so on and so forth. And for me, the biggest issue is education at that level. We can talk about, and that's, I suppose, where regulation can try help force that. But we're going through a sustainable transformation revolution, the same as we've been going through a digital transformation revolution. And yet if individuals go to do the MBA now or go to do the MBA in a couple of years' time, they'll find it radically different from the MBA program that they studied, a decade ago, 2 decades ago. Sustainability modules will be core components of MBA programs in the near future. And yet we've got, the executive leadership who have no professional development training, executive training from the top business schools in Africa or overseas to understand what we're talking about, organizational purpose, how social and natural capital dependencies and impacts affect enterprise value, sustainable development and enterprise value. There's such a big gap on that conversation that it becomes a very uphill battle. So for me, the biggest focus is on actually getting leadership, professional development, understanding around these issues, because actually they're not currently equipped to, in my opinion, to largely not currently equipped well to manage their organizations through the transformation that we need to undertake, and which sort of ties into the regulatory reporting that we're talking about around non-financial metrics and sustainability.
Thank you very much, Elan. We have indeed run out of time. Just to summarize, it will appear that...
Can I just...
Prof, I would love to come to you, but we have totally run out of time, and we can probably have another hour.
All right. Can I just make one point in those practical steps you were talking about?
30 seconds. 30 seconds.
Yeah. Okay, good. So one of those issues is in the NGS disclosure guideline. I think that needs to be revisited because the way it's constituted now is a bit confusing, but I believe maybe the IFRS Foundation coming in here to provide a lead will help us, because there has to be clarity on what you want to report. Then there is also the need for coordination between these. All right, okay. FRCN, then they trust in the information, assurance. And this is where the professional accountant will need to come in with ICANN. NGS should collaborate with ICANN in this respect to work for the assurance, because currently we're talking about limited assurance, and those sustainability reports have been prepared. The audit firms are just giving limited assurance. Can we go beyond limited assurance? And therefore, we need to work on the information to be able to go beyond limited assurance. Thank you.
Certainly will. As I said earlier, we keep pointing back to the regulator. The regulator must do this, the regulator must do that. As I said earlier, to whom much is given, much is demanded. And as Elan said, a lot of us did our MBAs from 15, 20 years ago, and by God, we have no business in the budget unless we actually go back to school. So Professor Ken, a lot of us will be visiting the university.
Sorry, Olamide, your mic, I think, isn't working properly.
Sorry, can you hear me clearly? We shall
be
meeting Professor Ken in the school very soon. And as I hand back over to the to our host, I will say this as a member of the House. I will be coming after you guys on behalf of the host. We must and we should do things collaboratively with them. And I would I would volunteer my time as the spokesman for them coming after you. I hand over back to the to our MC for the day. Thank you very much for having us. Thank you very much, Professor Ken. Thank you very much, Professor Innocent. Very much, Professor Carol, Eunice, Elan. It's been wonderful having you, and thank you very much for all your insights. I hand over back to our host. Thank you for having us. Have a good day.
I would like to say thank you once again to all our panel discussants. They've done a very fantastic job today. Insightful discussions from the panel today, going from the periphery to the core of the matter, raising awareness levels and providing practical tips on this journey to sustainability reporting. Thank you very much once again. We appreciate every one of you. And so at this point, we will be ending the YouTube broadcast. So everyone that has joined us via YouTube, we'd love to say a big thank you for your time. And we trust that you have gained deep and useful insights from today's session that will be of great assistance on the implementation journeys at our various organizations.